You're listening to the Justin Beahm Radio Hour.
From the frozen fields of the American Midwest, this is the Radio Hour podcast. I'm your host, Justin Beahm. Welcome to Season 3 of the show. On this episode, we're going to be turning back the clock to 1978 and taking a deep dive into Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. While I wasn't even 2 years old when this landed on October 28th of that year, the movie became a really big moment for me when I was a young fan of the band and discovered it years later. And then fast forward to 2012, and Kiss was about to release their new album Monster, with the lineup including Eric Singer on drums, wearing the Catman makeup, and Tommy Thayer playing guitar, wearing Ace's makeup, ultimately. Monster was about to land, the band was about to embark on a brand new tour, and they needed a tour book, a magazine that was a tie-in to the album and to the tour, and I luckily got tagged in to contribute to that. And for it, of course, the very first thing that came to mind was a retrospective on Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, which I was delighted the band accepted, because I wasn't sure, considering at least Paul and Gene's relationship with the movie over the years and interviews and things like that. They haven't exactly been real keen on it, especially Paul, but I immediately set about tracking down a few people from the production. First off was Gordon Hessler, the director. I also got Terry Morse, who's the producer on the show, and in the world of television, the producer is really how we think of directors in the cinema realm. I tracked down star Anthony Zerbe, who played Abner Devereaux in the movie, the great mad scientist behind all the chaos, and then Gene Simmons, of course. You're about to hear those interviews and a lot more, so stay tuned. Followed by voicemails. The topic for this episode was, what releases are you still looking for on deluxe, Blu-ray, or 4K? What are some films that you think haven't gotten the love that they deserve on physical media? We got some good voicemails on that. First, though, let's take a look at what's new. "2025 is going to be a year of expansion for me and for Reverend Entertainment. The umbrella relationship that I mentioned on a recent episode is a particularly exciting thing that's humming here. The label's been around a while, but over the last couple years in particular, they've gained a hell of a lot of traction, especially here in Region 1, I guess you could say, Region 1, Region A, in North America, with these box set releases, deluxe releases of standalone titles. They're doing things right, and they're doing it with the fans in mind. You're getting lobby card reproductions, booklets with some really creative stuff. I mean, that to me is the most exciting thing about this relationship with Umbrella. It has been an honor to work with all the labels and studios that I have in special features and all of that. But in terms of just creative openness, what I'm experiencing with Umbrella is blowing my mind. For them to want to bring me in was a tremendous honor. And then for them to be so cool, so open to off-the-beaten-path approaches to these releases has been heartening. It's also been something that I've sorely needed. I'll be making a lot more announcements in coming months on the new Umbrella stuff, but I'll just leave it at I am very excited about what's to come in that realm. Head over to justinbeam.com, where just prior to this recording, I launched the new merch store. I have a new partner that can do all kinds of stuff that wasn't possible with the previous folks that I was teaming up with. Front and back printing to the delight of my friend Shane Bundy. We have some old designs that I'm bringing back, like the Frankenstein shirt that my son Julian designed when he was about 6 or so, which is super adorable. I've expanded the Physical Media Forever line. I have the I Watch the Special Features shirts on there, the Reverend Skull shirt, which is a riff on Terror in the Isles, with a bunch of titles that I've produced the features on listed in there, instead of the movies that were featured in that documentary, like on that original cover art. I really love that piece. There's embroidered caps, mugs, all kinds of stuff. Check it out. And while you're on the site, go to Coming Soon in that same drop-down menu, where you'll find the upcoming releases that are on the way. As this episode is hitting the airwaves today, Inglourious Bastards is finally available on 4K from Arrow Video, which has some new stuff from me on it. Tremendous fun to be a part of that, and a super solid release. But you look at everything else that's coming out there, and you can see that even this first quarter here is already packed with 4K releases of Body Parts, April Fool's Day, and Graveyard Shift on their way, as well as The Gift from Arrow Video, and then the Bewitched, the complete series Blu-ray set from Mill Creek. For that, I produced a whole bunch, I think maybe 27 or so audio commentaries that are brand new, and most notably, I directed and produced a documentary that's on there that's all about the series and its legacy, with lots of faces and friends of the show. It's something special that I teamed up with Herbie J. Pilato on. So, that's on the coming soon, and there's always the now available page on my site too, where you can see everything that is already out there and available. So thank you for checking out justinbeahm.com and keeping up with the latest. I have a couple new music projects that are underway, the first of which is the Jungle Room Ramblers. It's a 50s band playing a bunch of Elvis and Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, Johnny Cash, fun stuff. It's a band that I've always wanted to be a part of, and it's finally happening, and we've been loving it. There's also a Doom Jazz project that I just initiated with my friend Christian Day, and we're calling that Night Flyer. While the Ramblers are going to be a gigging band, Night Flyer is going to be a recording project, and we're already hard at work on our first EP that we should have out pretty soon here for you, so stay tuned for details on that. I'm in the midst of production on the first few audiobooks that I'm narrating, and this is a whole new thing for me that has been a lot of fun too. Once these are announced, I will talk about them on the show as well. And to throw a little mystery curveball into the mix, on the next episode of the Radio Hour, I'm going to be talking about a new publishing project. Dun dun dun. More on that next time. Let's hop into the Wayback Machine, put on our face paint, and grab those platform boots. It's time for Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. 1977 was the year Kiss hit the stratosphere. Manager Bill Aucoin had led the band into all kinds of new realms. In the publishing world, their first teaming up with Marvel Comics Group occurred in Howard the Duck issues 13 and 14 in that spring. They had been recording concerts while on tour for another Alive album, and Kiss Alive 2 was underway. The band went in the studio to record some overdubs on that, which they famously did on Alive 1 as well, although at the time they weren't real forthcoming about that. It was eventually revealed that yes, they were getting in there and doctoring some things up. But oh well, they're great albums nonetheless. And that second one especially, that exhibits a lot of the individual bands' tastes. As the albums continued to go on throughout the band's history, it got to the point where everybody had their own song at some point, their own lead vocal, I guess you could say. I think that Peter Criss with Beth really led the charge on that, which was a huge hit for them, off Destroyer in 1976. Once Alive 2 was in the can, they went back in the studio for Love Gun, and they also returned to the Marvel world, leaving Howard the Duck in the dust and moving into their very own comic book. Famously, they did a photo shoot for one of the ultimate gimmicks the band ever participated in May of '77 that saw the guys standing over a red ink barrel along with smiling Stan Lee as each of the fellas dumped their own blood into the ink. Perfect Kiss moment, perfect Kiss gimmick. And that comic book was really the first time that the band was moving into the realm of superhero-dom. They were bigger than life already. They had lunchboxes, the Mego dolls, all kinds of merchandise that was out there. Kids were eating it up. Adults were loving it. And Gene, being such a nut for comic books, it was a huge moment for him getting into the pages of Marvel for the Marvel Comics Super Special Kiss Volume 1, which came out in June of '77. Alive 2 hit shelves in October of that year, and NBC aired a little documentary called The Land of Hype and Glory in November. That was all about Kiss. It was really a promotional piece for Alive 2 more than anything else, and the band ended the year on an absolute high note. Things commercially couldn't have been bigger for the band, but internally, unfortunately, things were starting to fracture. As the band released the first Greatest Hits album in April of '78, Double Platinum, the band members were really hardly talking to each other. They were already seeing their own paths ahead. There was no certainty to the future of this group functioning as a unit anymore, And especially Ace and Peter had their eye on solo projects. They were getting itchy about wanting to do their own kind of music. Peter's a big jazz guy, Ace is into all kinds of stuff, and they were looking to branch out beyond the confines of Kiss. This, of course, was paired famously with substance abuse issues from both of them at this time. They've both since cleaned up, so it is a success story in the end, ultimately. Ace has been releasing albums over the years since he left Kiss to great fanfare. He's topped the charts with his last couple of them, and they're solid efforts. They really are. I wish Peter was recording more. I would love a jazz album from him. I think would be just so incredible. It is something you see online once in a while where you'll find a video thrown up out of nowhere of Peter sitting in with some big band. And it's so intriguing because I know his heart is in that music, and I wish that he would have had more of a chance to explore that. In 1978, things in the Kiss world couldn't have been bigger, couldn't have been more successful, and couldn't have been more frayed. In the spring of that year, manager Bill Aucoin approached the guys about the possibility of doing a movie that he described as Star Wars meets A Hard Day's Night. It was Kiss meets the Phantom of the Park, and it was for Hanna-Barbera-Productions, the famous cartoon company that gave us all kinds of iconic animated characters, and Deke. It was to be a larger-than-life presentation of the guys with superpowers in an amusement park battling an evil madman. Set for a relatively short shoot schedule, they began filming in May, and on the 19th they did a little press conference at Magic Mountain Amusement Park in Valencia, California, where they were shooting the bulk of the film. The interiors were to be shot at the Culver Studios in Culver City, California, right there in the heart of Los Angeles. A storied studio that really, if you've seen the Creature from the Black Lagoon films, the main house in the third film, The Creature Walks Among Us from 1956, is the building that you can still see when you drive by Culver Studios to this day, and it's where they housed the creature. They built an enclosure for him on the side of it, and when I first visited this location with my friend Tim Edwards, who's a composer pal of mine, he did the score on You Can't Kill the Boogeyman and a bunch of other stuff for me, and many more to come, by the way. I was most excited about seeing this building from Creature Walks Among Us. Again, you can go by the studio even to this day, which I think is now owned by Netflix. Blech. But it is still visible from the street and very cool. Also shot here, Gone with the Wind, and countless other TV shows. Film history is rooted in the Culver studio. And Kiss walked those same stages, sat in those same dressing rooms, and put on that iconic makeup for Phantom of the Park. So there's a lot of film history tied into this. Also, Gene, being, as I mentioned earlier, such a comic books nut, is also huge into horror. Huge into horror. And so this project for him was something that was incredibly exciting, and he was really the spearhead of the whole thing. Once Bill Aucoin introduced the guys to the team that would be involved with the production, including director Gordon Hessler, it was Gene who became the main conduit for communication between the production side and the studio, the producers, the director, and everything. He was kind of the heart of the whole project, and he doesn't pull any punches when he talks about it. But at the time, at least, it was clear that he was very proud to be involved with this project and saw it as something as a jumping point for the band, because he was always looking forward, always thinking of new avenues for them to explore and, of course, exploit in some ways if you want to look at it from a merchandising standpoint. But if you think about the comic books, the intersection of the Greatest Hits album, another Alive album, you have Love Gun heading to stand soon. This was a huge moment that made total sense for them to find new media realms to explore. Phantom of the Park was going to provide that on NBC. The production, though, while remembered fondly by everybody who was involved with it outside the band, was really seen as fraught with problems from those internally. Let's start off here with the words of Gene Simmons, who I interviewed again for that Monster tour book and album tie-in magazine back in 2012. I'll preface all the interviews by saying at the time what I was doing was recording through pretty primitive means, and I've done my best to clean up the audio on these. I was also transcribing live as I was having conversations with people. So I was typing in the background as I was having these discussions, and despite my efforts, I can't find the audio file for Gene, but I do have the notes that I made during our conversation. So these are quotes from Gene that I was just quickly typing out just in case the audio failed, which did happen from time to time back in the day. But here's Gene on Phantom of the Park. When we were filming Kiss Meets the Phantom, the band was actually very dysfunctional. Both Ace and Peter were growing increasingly unhappy with the band and themselves. Drugs and alcohol were taking their toll on them. And I had gone to Hollywood. I had started living with Cher and was seduced by the Hollywood lifestyle. No drugs or booze on my part, but lots of ego. Tons of it. Ace and Peter were getting unhappier by the day. On some days, they were a joy to be around. On other days, they were miserable, and they made everybody else's lives miserable. They did not always show up for work. It got so bad the director had to find an elderly man to put on Peter's makeup and sit behind the drums to pretend to be Peter. It got even worse. When the rough cut of the film was previewed, the director felt no one could understand what Peter was saying, so the voice you actually hear in the movie is not Peter Criss. It's an actor who overdubbed all of Peter's lines. During this time, Peter went driving down Pacific Coast Highway near Malibu, California with a passenger at very fast speeds, so fast that he had a bad accident, which involved a 400-plus foot crash that left his body burned as well as his passenger. I was so furious with him. I did not visit him in the hospital. There was another reason. I believe there was an ethical line that had been crossed, and it's better if I don't divulge what that line was. And then the boom was lowered. Peter and Ace wanted a meeting with the band, and our then-manager, Bill Aucoin, Ace in particular, wanted to leave the band and start a solo career. Peter was going along with it. During the band meeting, Aucoin suggested that Ace and Peter stay in the band as well as do their solo records. In fact, why don't all the members of the band do solo records at the same time? And after everyone did their solo records, get back together as a band. It worked, but only for a while. The end of the original lineup wouldn't be long in coming, no matter how much we tried to hold it together for the band, for the fans. Looking back on the movie experience, it was filled with both joy and sorrow. I'm sure all of us have regrets for the things we did to each other, for the things we said to each other, for the delusional nature of fame and fortune, and drugs and alcohol. We were in our 20s. We couldn't fathom or cope with just how big the band had become worldwide. It was only a few years since we first walked in the streets of New York City and had those big dreams, so long ago. The car crash that Gene is referring to happened immediately after production on Phantom of the Park, actually. It was on May 28th of 1978 when that occurred in Marina del Rey. The accident was brutal, and it was well publicized, and photos of him with black and blue eyes and burns and things made their way into all the tabloids and stuff. It was a really shocking moment, and it was the first time that the veil had really been lifted on Peter having a problem, on something bigger than just fame taking its toll on these guys. The solo album thing was huge, though. I mentioned earlier that at this time, Peter and Ace were thinking about striking out on their own, and there you have it. In Gene's own words, it was their idea to do solo records that Bill Aucoin embraced and turned into what would become the iconic 4 Kiss solo albums released simultaneously that saw the guys each heading into the studio with their own lineup of musicians and their own arrangements, along with different engineers. Although everything was branded under Kiss and had similar inserts to those albums, each one of them has a really distinctly different feel. And when they landed on September 18th, that fall, they all charted relatively low, honestly. I think Gene's was the highest charting at 22, and Ace had the only single that was a hit, and that was his cover of New York Groove. The production of the solo albums ended up being a foundation for a lot of what was to come for each of these members down the road. You could see Gene's Hollywood glitz. His was full of all kinds of guest stars and celebrities, while Peter had a lot more kind of soulful, roots-type tunes. Paul's was more glam, and Ace's was straight-ahead rock and roll. And in that project, Ace really formed the union of what would become his solo band for many years afterwards, especially with Anton Fig on drums. Anton would play a role in the Kiss world down the road as well. He had done some overdubs on a number of albums without being credited, and he was very much a part of Ace's universe for decades to come. But you can see here that everyone's heart is kind of in their own places, and with the band hardly talking to each other as they were heading into the production of Phantom of the Park, it's no wonder that things were disjointed throughout the duration of the film's production. I found an interesting artifact relating to the solo albums that I'm going to include as a Patreon exclusive bonus episode. It's a promotional cassette tape that was sent to radio stations, intended to promote the albums, but also to dispel rumors about Kiss, and it involves interviews with all four guys about their solo projects and what they wanted to do with them, how the production went down on each of them. I mean, it's a really intriguing time capsule of a very special moment for these guys, and you'll be able to hear that on the Patreon, which again is patreon.com/the Justin Beahm Radio Hour. You can also find the link to that on my website, justinbeahm.com. Let's hear Paul talking about this. This is a little excerpt from his book, Face the Music, A Life Exposed, which came out in 2014. As you'll hear, Paul has very little reverence for Phantom of the Park, which is kind of unfortunate because I think he's great in it. Anyway, here's Paul.
One of Bill's follies was the movie Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. He thought that film was the next step for us. The Beatles had A Hard Day's Night and Help, and we should have our film. He sold it to us as A Hard Day's Night meets Star Wars, which had come out the year before. It would have lots of cool special effects. Nobody in the band had the slightest clue about acting. None of us read the script. We didn't care. We trusted Bill's judgment. When we started filming, it didn't take an expert in the field to know we were in deep shit and there was no getting out of it. The director asked us after each scene whether we thought it was good. We had no idea what we were doing. For us, a good take was one where we didn't blow our lines. If we said the right words, we moved on to the next shot. Someone off camera fed us our lines. When we got ready to roll the camera, I yelled, "Line!" And someone said something like, "Gee, Ace, it's time we get going." Then I said, "Gee, Ace, it's time we get going." That's a keeper. It was horrific. It didn't remotely resemble acting. In one scene, we levitated a box using wires. We assumed the wires would be rendered invisible by special effects people. Not so. Meanwhile, the four of us weren't speaking unless we were delivering lines. Peter and Ace frequently left during filming. In one scene, we had to use Ace's stunt double, who happened to be black, after Ace left without notice. It was clear as day in the final version that it wasn't Ace. We had to play a fake concert at Magic Mountain Amusement Park for another scene. When we were on stage, I turned around and saw some random old man in cat makeup and a wig playing the drums and chewing gum. Peter had taken off and they threw this guy up there. One bright spot about the production was that we had the Westmores doing makeup for us. They were the first family of Hollywood makeup. George, the patriarch, had set up the first makeup department for a Hollywood studio in 1917, and subsequent generations became legendary for makeup and effects work. Over the years, I had learned the steps and intricacies of applying the makeup to my face, and one of the Westmore sons watched as I did my own makeup one day on the set of the movie. "How'd you learn to do that?" he asked. "I taught myself," I said. "It was just trial and error." "Well, that's exactly the way we would do it," he said. "Cool." When the movie was finished, we saw it at a screening at the Screen Actors Guild Theater on Sunset Boulevard. If you thought it was bad on a TV screen, you should have seen it on the big screen. People openly laughed. I slunk down in my seat. It was humiliating. The finished film was absolutely awful, and to have to stand when the lights came up while various people who had been involved with it came over to lie to me about how great it was made it that much more humiliating.
All four of the guys have memoirs about their time in Kiss, and Ace's landed in 2011. He actually gave me a copy of that book when I met him at the Rock and Shock convention. I think it would have been that same year he was out promoting the book's release. And I used to do Rock and Shock in Worcester, Massachusetts every year, hosting panels and things like that. And it was really cool to meet Ace. He was so kind. He was a huge fan of Fangoria magazine, which was my main gig at that time. And we really hit it off. He handed over a couple books to me, drew some really cool space scenes in them along with his signature. one of which I gave to my friend Shane as a gift. The book is called No Regrets, and it's a great read. Here's what Ace had to say about Phantom of the Park. The marketing silliness reached a peak of sorts with Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, a 1978 made-for-television movie with a plot so ridiculous that I was laughing just thinking about it. We played superhero versions of ourselves, locked in a battle with a demented scientist bent on taking over a popular amusement park by creating 4 androids that looked just like us. How could anyone make this shit up? It wasn't the greatest movie, but that has never bothered me because I wasn't under the impression that anyone expected it to be anything other than a ridiculous farce, including the people who wrote, directed, and produced it. If you look at it now, the movie seems kind of campy and cool. The problem is it wasn't meant to be that way. I watch it now and get a kick out of it, but I know Gene is embarrassed about it. Then again, Gene takes everything so fucking seriously, which is ironic since he's the only one who always claimed to be happy that Kiss was selling out arenas and moving millions of records without regard for artistic integrity. How the hell do you make a movie called Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park and expect people not to laugh? I also heard that when he saw This Is Spinal Tap, he didn't think it was very funny. To each his own. I personally thought it was hysterical. There were a lot of bad ideas surrounding that TV movie project, the main one being who in their right mind thought the 4 guys in Kiss could act. I suppose you could argue that all rock stars are actors, and obviously more than a few of them have made successful transitions to the big screen. In Kiss, we were already wearing makeup and portraying characters whenever we went on stage, so maybe it seemed like we'd have an easier time than most. When I first heard about the project, I thought it sounded like it might be kind of fun, but then I didn't take it seriously at all, and in very short, I discovered that acting was a lot less interesting and enjoyable than I suspected. I should have had some idea of what to expect when I got the original script and discovered that I didn't have a single line of dialogue, not one. Every time my character was supposed to speak, the only thing that came out of his mouth was the sound of a parrot. Heck! That's exactly what was written on the page, 3 capital letters. A-W-K. Heck. I guess the writers had picked up on a quirk in my personality, although I'm not sure where they got that information. Sometimes when I'd get loaded and didn't want to engage in conversation, I'd mimic the squawk of a parrot until the other person gave up and went away. Pretty silly, I admit, and that was the Ace Frehley persona the screenwriters wanted to present, or maybe they just thought I was too stoned or drunk to remember any of my lines, so they tried to keep it as simple as possible. When I first saw the script, I didn't know what to think. Was it a joke? If so, I didn't find it particularly amusing. What the fuck is this? I asked Bill. I've got no lines in this stupid fucking movie. Why am I wasting my time? He laughed. What do you want me to do, Ace? Tell them to rewrite it. They did, and almost magically I had the ability to talk. I even had amazing superpowers that allowed me to transport the whole band at will to another location, so I took a deep breath and decided to give the project my best shot. A lot of Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park was filmed on location at Magic Mountain, where we actually performed a somewhat staged Kiss concert, although most of the interior scenes were done at Culver City Studios. Regardless of where we were filming, I had to be on set at 8 o'clock in the morning, which was a complete drag for me in those days. The band was staying at a posh hotel in Beverly Hills, a good 45 minutes away by car, and it wasn't like I was getting 8 hours of beauty sleep each night. I was busy being Ace. Hitting the clubs, sometimes partying until the wee hours. Who the hell wants to get up at 7 a.m. with a hangover? Not me, that's for sure, especially when I never knew exactly how much of my time would be required. It didn't take long to figure out that most of the movie-making process was about hanging out in your trailer all day, waiting for someone to tell you you were needed on the set. A couple of times during the movie, I arrived bright and early, threw on my makeup and costume, got all ready to go, and then sat in my trailer. After an hour or two, one of the assistants would stop by and say, "You know what, Ace? We're doing some close-ups on Gene this morning, so I don't think we're going to need you until after lunch. Why don't you relax for a while?" That really made me crazy. Here I was, one of the stars of the film, and you'd think that maybe they could have been a little more considerate? Maybe let me know the night before? Don't these fucking people plan? Truth is, I was doing a lot of coke at the time, and my nerves were becoming frayed, to say the least. I was getting an ounce of blow delivered to my trailer about once a week. The delivery boy was actually one of the actors on the set who had a minor role in the film. It was really nuts. We each had our own trailer to hang in. I filled my fridge with cold beer and champagne, and since there was a lot of downtime, I indulged in the white powder frequently and followed up with whatever was handy. You'd be surprised what was handy on a movie set in Los Angeles in the 70s. The actor supplying me used to put the Coke in the character's hat and act like we were buddies, just having a cold one together in my trailer. He actually went on to become a pretty well-known character actor down the road, with roles in several big Hollywood hits. For the most part, I was clueless. I didn't realize this was the way movies worked, that downtime was a big part of an actor's day, maybe the biggest part. And so, the third or fourth time that it happened, I snapped. Totally went off on the producer. When confronted, he really didn't have much to say in his defense regarding how the shoot schedule was being handled, which didn't make me feel any better. "Fuck this," I said to myself, and then I shouted, "I'm out of here," which, as I realize now, was extremely unprofessional behavior. I went back to my trailer, quietly, washed off my makeup, and changed into my regular clothes, snorted a couple lines, and washed it down with a cold one, and then jumped into my Mercedes. I drove quietly off the lot, trying not to attract too much attention, but in the rearview mirror I could see my bodyguard and road manager in hot pursuit. Well, not so hot, actually. I let them follow me for a while as I bided my time until we got into a more familiar area. The traffic was becoming dense, and I began making lefts and rights, slowly and methodically trying to lose them, until finally I hit the gas and pulled away, leaving them stuck behind a truck at a red light. The next thing I knew, I was on my own, somewhere in the suburbs of Los Angeles, hanging out at a bar, washing down some tranquilizers with a beer. I calmed down after a while and soon began feeling very guilty about sounding off to the producer. Hell, he'd only been doing his job, and I was making it harder for him. Maybe the script and schedule changes had occurred that morning and there was nothing he could do about it, and I was acting like a spoiled brat. I realize now that all the cocaine and alcohol was really starting to affect my judgment and how I perceived life in general, not just within the band. Ace then tells a story about heading to a museum after he had left the set, but then says, "I left the exhibit with a feeling of extraordinary well-being and peace. I drove to the set, apologized to the director and producer for my short fuse and absence, and I promised that I would behave better in the future. They accepted my apology and everything seemed to be okay. I didn't learn until much later when I saw the movie for the first time that filming had gone on without me that day, including a scene in which our characters waged an epic battle with Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Wolfman in the park's Chamber of Horrors. My character was a big part of that, and in the opening scenes I am present, but once the action starts to pick up, someone else takes over, under the best of circumstances, while the whole thing could have looked silly. But on top of that, the director had enlisted the services of my stunt double to finish the remaining shots in the scene. Usually a stunt double is used only in distant shots or quick cutaways, but in this case my stunt double was a black man, a terrific guy, hell of a stunt double too, but he didn't look anything like me facially, and even with all the makeup on it was painfully obvious. I mean, you can see it clearly if you watch the movie. During the fight scene in the Chamber of Horrors with Frankenstein, he gets knocked around and thrown into a pillar with a couple of skeletons tied to it. Just hit the pause button. Hey man, that's not Ace, that's a black dude. Very funny stuff, and let's face it, would you expect anything less from the producers who made Scooby-Doo? The funniest day of shooting, though, was probably the one when we did a scene at the pool, in which we're all confronted by the park manager and head of security about Gene knocking around a few security guards the night before. In the beginning, the park manager rapidly walks into the scene and toward us from the other side of the pool. Well, on the first or second take, he tripped on one of the rocks and took a bad tumble and fell flat on his face and hands. For every take after, I was completely overtaken by the mental image of him stumbling. I must have ruined at least 75 takes with my laughter. On the first few takes, the other guys joined in, but after that I was pretty much alone. It was very embarrassing for the other actor and me, but I absolutely lost all control of myself. The incident reminds me of when I was a little kid and routinely got busted for cracking up in school or in church. That was the funniest part of the movie, but the most fun was at night when we were shooting at Magic Mountain. I bought a motorbike while we were there. The park was closed to the public after dark, so I had free rein on the smooth asphalt roads throughout the facility. Between takes, I'd jump on the bike with a nice buzz and ride around the whole park without a care in the world. Remember, back in the Bronx, when I was a kid, we didn't have motorbikes, so it was really my first chance to enjoy myself without having to worry about other traffic. It put a smile on my face for sure, but I nearly broke my neck a few times. Typical for me, though, just being Ace. Oh well, those were just some of the many things that happened or went wrong on Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. None of it meant all that much to me. The whole thing was a goof. If you take it in that light, it's almost like a Saturday morning kids show or a Japanese sci-fi flick. Come on, who doesn't like Mothra and Rodan? From day one, I thought it was going to be campy and silly. Gene, unfortunately, took the whole process very seriously and was infatuated with making movies. I also believe it was the spark that got him thinking he could become a movie star. In fact, he did a few more films afterward, too, mistakenly thinking he could act. Kiss Meets the Phantom was a huge embarrassment for him, I think. For me, I had a few laughs and made some new friends and had a very interesting experience off the set. I didn't really take it seriously from the outset and didn't think much about it when it was over. To be honest, I thought it was a natural step in the devolution of Kiss. We got exactly what we deserved and exactly what most people expected. And Ace wasn't the only one who left the set frequently. You're going to hear that in interviews, I think especially with Terry Morse coming up, who is the producer on the show, where he talks about Peter just disappearing from set. There would be times where they couldn't find him, where no one knew where he was. So it wasn't just Ace. But where Ace came back and apologized, it sounds like Peter never really did that. From the 2003 book Kiss Behind the Mask, the official authorized biography, here's a little bit from Peter on Phantom of the Park. Bill thought it was time for us to disappear, to take a rest and then come back and be more in demand. The rest was long overdue, but the film knocked the hell out of us. While we were making it, I thought of leaving the band. That's how crazy the movie made me. I've always wanted to be a serious actor like Al Pacino or Robert De Niro, but I didn't like the slapstick. It was like the Marx Brothers / A Hard Day's Night type of movie. Still, it was a hell of an experience and I learned a lot. Ace felt the same contempt for the film. We would visit each other in our trailers, and we both stocked our refrigerators with wall-to-wall green bottles of Heineken. We'd drink and snort Coke all day while we waited for our calls. That was the worst part of movie making, sitting around for sometimes 10 hours before they'd be ready for a scene. I wasn't accustomed to that kind of discipline, especially when we were in our full makeup, waiting hours to do a 5-minute scene. We'd get so fucked up that when we finally got the call, we'd stumble out of the trailer, slurring our words and hitting the walls and knocking props over. They told me that the film would take the band to new heights, that it would cost millions if I walked away, that if we could just get through this film, we'd do our solo projects and everything would be okay. They kept working on me, and I agreed to finish the movie, and then we'd see where we were at. Of course, this led to the 4 solo albums that I talked about a little bit ago, and Phantom of the Park was promoted simultaneously with the 4 albums in lots of different newspapers around the country. You'd have Phantom on top with the note about its broadcast on October 28th, and then below there'd be a note about the double platinum, best of collection, and the 4 solo records. So they were really pouring everything into one effort when it came to the promotional side of things. Back in the park, behind the camera, was director Gordon Hessler, Amicus and AIP veteran who was coming to this project with fresh eyes, not really knowing much about Kiss, having never seen their stage show before, which is something he mentions kind of lamenting in the interview because he thinks he could have shot that better if he knew what the different high spots were. Gordon was incredibly kind and generous with his time for this piece that I did, and the interview that you're about to hear was his last. He's a wonderful guy, and you're going to hear that in this conversation. Very forthcoming about his experience on the film, and even though it was challenging by all these accounts that you're hearing here, it was something that he relished the opportunity to do. And he has a crazy story about Gene and Cher in here too, so here's Gordon.
Do you remember when you were first approached about doing this film, and by whom?
Yes, it was a former producer, Dick Hayward, who worked for AIP. In the AIP days, he moved to London and became the executive producer there, doing most of the films that AIP was making. Okay. And I worked for him. And when he came back and left AIP, I think AIP, fell apart, he asked me to do this film because he was working for Hanna-Barbera at the time. So it just came out of the blue. He said, I have a film to make. It was not what I call a regular film. It was really a television show, but a longer length television show.
Were you familiar with the band Kiss?
I was not. It was not my kind of music. But music is very much apart from me, both classical and jazz and so on. But I was not into the genre, and the genre they were in at the time was talking to kids.
Yeah.
To really say they can do much more and they're much more important people and deal with all the problems the kids had. I'm talking about very young kids.
When you were first talking about the project, was there a script already done at that point?
Yes, there was a script done by a couple of writers, they're very young and somewhat inexperienced.
Okay.
But it was a film that could be easily made today, but was incredibly difficult to do on a television kind of a budget because it went into special effects.
Right.
And at the time, nobody was really equipped to do special effects like they were, like they are today, you know. So that it inhibited the script that they wrote because I could only do what was technically feasible in a film that you shoot in, I don't know how many days, but very little time. Maybe it was made in 8 or 10 days. You know, so,
wow.
You know, it was a very tough schedule. And the television people, I tried to convince them to use the blue screen television, but it was out of their depths. So we went to the old optical way of doing it, which is, it works, but a lot of the film lost a lot of it because of that.
What was the story to you as you remember it behind the film?
Well, it was a story of the KISS people who got special powers and were able to do things that not normal people could do, which enhanced their stature. And the special powers were the special effects. And the special effects were toned down, so they could have had much more powers if we had gone to blue screen rather than very old optical things. So it all worked, but it was toned down, and I'm sure the two young writers who actually I never met probably were disappointed because we couldn't execute everything that they wanted.
Did you have meetings with the band?
Yes.
Before production began?
Yeah, certainly, because we had to meet because, you know, when you're shooting, at least I know who they are, and they were obviously curious to know who the director was. So we had outside Universal Studios, we had a meeting that was probably at Hanna-Barbera, where we met.
Mm-hmm.
And they came with all their entourage and it was quite devastating to see these people. They were most fun to work with, incredible fun, and I enjoyed working with them very much. But they're very bizarre, and they lived in a world of their own that I'd never seen, and most people hadn't seen. So I got to know them pretty well, and I enjoyed them very much.
If I just run through the band members, maybe you could tell me what it was like and then what you thought about each one, starting with Gene Simmons.
Gene Simmons seemed to be the brains of the outfit. He was educated. I believe he might have even been a school teacher.
He was, yes.
And I think all the ideas came from him somehow. He seemed to be the leader of the group and the one I communicated with the most.
Okay.
Because I could work on, a very good level. The others I didn't get, I knew them, but I never got to know them as well, because they were all in their separate worlds, and he was highly intelligent, and apparently, I only found that out later, liked horror films very much.
Yes. Let
me say this, they were all extremely cooperative, and that first meeting cemented that kind of relationship when I met them for the first time.
Yeah.
And from then on, it went marvelous. I had really no problems at all. The problem was learning the process. I'd never been to one of those where they set up a whole, as it were, like a tent, and 10,000 people come, And
Oh,
I'd never been to. I had no idea what it was. And they got, I think, 10,000, maybe 5,000 to 10, to attend the end of the film where they're all playing. And you can see the show. I'd never seen that show. It would have been a great advantage to know, because I'd known more what to do with it. But it worked out very well, I thought, anyway.
What about Paul Stanley?
Paul Stanley, I was very impressed with him. I didn't get to know him that well, actually. You know, as a director, you're so busy. You know, you really don't spend that much time with the people, because you're setting up everything. You have a quick rehearsal and shoot. And
right. The other two members of the band were Peter Criss, he was the drummer, and Ace Frehley. Over time, it's been rumored that Peter Criss could not deliver his lines during the production. He would have been the one with the cat makeup on. Do you remember him having issues remembering, or being maybe even drinking on set or anything?
You know, it's very hard to know. You know, that time everywhere it was slightly high, you know, taking drugs and so on, which it's very hard to, you know, if I had a party in Hollywood, a lot of the people who came there were, you know, smoking and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
So it's very hard to know if that was an inhibitor, but I don't remember having any problems for me for lines. I've had much more problems with much bigger actors, really well-known actors, where they absolutely could not remember one line against the next, where it became a real serious problem. But
wow.
For his, if he didn't say a line correctly or said it near it didn't make that much difference, because as long as it made sense and he got the message over, it was fine. But I don't remember any problem.
There is a gentleman who is credited for doing the voice for him in the film, and I think that might have been what prompted people to start talking about that. Well, do you remember having to overdub him?
You know, frankly, I don't remember that.
Okay.
It's possible we did that, but I might have not been present at that dubbing, because, you know, when you're a freelance director, very often you're already on another show.
Right.
When some of the post-production, which the director normally would be there, would supervise. Certainly, if it's a film, yes, but this was television.
Right. Okay, and so you don't remember any issues
I
there.
don't remember that.
When you were talking with Kiss in maybe that first meeting, do you remember what they were saying they wanted out of the film, or what Gene said he wanted this to be for the band?
The general discussion at the first was more get to know one another.
Yeah.
And talk about some of the technical problems. There's no sort of speeches going between anybody who said, I feel the film should go in this direction or that.
Okay.
This is a room, a basic office space where you have chairs and so on, and these people are followed by entourage of helpers, and the first thing one of the people, may have been the drummer or something, said, I'd like eggs Benedict for breakfast. Where you get that, I don't know. But somebody produced it. They got what they ordered. And they just had unlimited money for anything. It's really to get to know and how we would work together and how certain sequences were going to be done and so on. It was just a general meeting, that was all.
Did you guys storyboard the film, or did you just work off of the script? No storyboarding. Okay.
I just have my own little storyboard, very, very, limited.
Right.
Not like you would do on a bigger picture.
Do you remember what kind of budget you were working with on this?
That I wouldn't be privy to, very frankly. Because just as the director, here was the script, we broke it down, and the cost was handled through Deke and the production people. But it was fairly I would imagine it's quite an expensive picture.
So obviously there were other people in the cast here, most notably Anthony Zerbe, who played Abner Devereaux in the film, the central character. What do you remember about Anthony?
He was a wonderful actor, very, very intelligent, and was able to put more into the character than possibly was originally intended by the writers, but he was marvelous.
And what kind of discussions did you guys have about his role? Were you trying to make him into the brooding mad scientist, or into more of an obsessed kind of...
Yeah, when you get a really wonderful actor who knows his job, as a director, the best thing is to leave them alone, unless they're going down the wrong path or character you don't see at all. But he got it instinctively. And, you have to say very little to the man because he knew what he was doing.
The main other cast member, aside from sort of the thugs at the beginning, would have been Deborah Ryan as Melissa in the film. And what do you remember about Deborah?
I believe what happened, if I remember correctly, there was another girl cast for that part. And nobody liked her, that is, the networks. So I think she was recast very quickly into the film after the first day or two of shooting.
Huh. And how did she handle that, being thrown into the fire like that?
Well, she was professional. That does happen quite sometimes, because when the networks see the rushes, 2 or 3 days later, they're all criticizing everything, and that has happened to me once before when I was doing a film in Australia where nobody was too happy with one of the central characters, and they immediately put somebody else on it.
We touched a little bit earlier on the location. How did you decide on Six Flags there in California?
Well, the best location, which is close to town, where you could shoot this, and it had been used before, so it's very easy to get to it with a crew. Mm-hmm. It's considered within the area, so that you're allowed to shoot without, paying location fees and that kind of thing. That it's within an area where people can travel and get to it in a day's work.
And what was your impression of the park? I mean, had you ever been to something like that before? It's huge.
I had seen it being built. I actually had some shares of the company, not Six Flags, but of that whole area that was bought. It now no longer exists, but you could buy shares of all that land. And I had a few, and it was nice to work on that property in that case. It just happened to be by coincidence.
When you were traveling through the park looking for locations, were you part of that decision-making process where you were setting up?
Yeah. Obviously, usually you go with a scouting. It's 3 or 4 or 5 people who scout various things, and then you decide on the location, and then see if you can make it in the budget, and then you've got it.
Where was the big stage set up where the band performed? Was that actually right next to the
It was
the park?
In that area. I can't remember the exact place, but it had, you would never put a theater up there, but all the people who were the audience were given free tickets to induce them to come.
You mentioned earlier, you tell that funny story about one of the band members asking for an omelet, or a special breakfast at that meeting. What kind of demands did they have during production?
I didn't. You see, they were so uneducated in the film processing that it was all new to them, except for the leader. But when you're working as a director, there are a lot of things going behind the scenes that you don't know of because you're so busy concentrating. And I'm sure an assistant director got a tremendous problems because maybe one of them asked for some. I'm just making this up now. They might have asked for something and demanded something and either got it or didn't get it. That happens a lot of times in the film. But the director's not aware of that problem unless it becomes a problem because you can't produce that actor at the time they were ready to shoot. And they had a very fine production manager who was Terry Morse, was very experienced filmmaker. And as the producer, he would know much more details than I was ever privy to.
Yeah.
And why certain locations were caused and who was fired as an actor. Hanna-Barbera, it's an animation studio. I knew nothing about them. And they knew nothing about me. And they probably hired Terry Morse, who was very efficient in picture making.
Mm-hmm.
And he would settle all the director's problems, which is the producer's job anyway.
Hanna-Barbera, I mean, that brings up a good point that they were an animation studio. So, I mean, this is unusual territory for them, right? Did they seem to understand what was going on?
It was Deke was the inspiration of this, to get them out of the animation area and make a full-length picture.
I see.
I'm only guessing at that.
The film obviously has a number of fight scenes in it, and was choreographing those fight scenes complicated, especially considering how short a shoot you were dealing with there? Did you do a lot of rehearsals and things?
No, there was very little time. You just, as it were, get on with it. You know, if a monkey has to climb one of those, you know, huge thing, it's arranged beforehand by the stunt people. All is demanded is get this monkey from here to there, and you could only have a chance to rehearse it once or twice at the most, and start shooting it.
Were there stunt doubles used for all the members of the band?
Oh yeah.
Okay, throughout
and it's very easy because a lot of it, you try to use the principles where there's no danger involved.
Right.
And you need a close-up, but you have to have doubles.
Sort of famously, the stunt double for Ace Frehley, the guitarist, was actually an African American, and you can clearly see that in the film. Was that ever an issue, or is that something that you even noticed when you were shooting?
I didn't even notice it, very frankly, if you really want to know.
Oh, that's funny. It's one of those bits of trivia about the film that everyone finds very interesting.
Yeah, it's funny that, and a lot of rumors turn eventually into historical truths.
Right.
But, I think it worked out well but it was television, you know.
Yeah.
But what was the most interesting were the four characters who were playing really for the first time in the movie industry. I think they enjoyed it.
Was the spook house inside Six Flags?
Which house?
The sort of haunted ride.
Oh no, all of that. Those are on the stage. There's a lot of stage production, you know, that you build sets and that kind of thing. I can't remember this, you know, because since it was Hanna-Barbera didn't have any studios, we went on different locations for wherever we built the sets, and I don't even remember which studio we built them on.
Back to the performance at the end of the film there. You said that the audience was given free tickets to do this. How are those tickets distributed? Do you remember how they, was it on the radio? How did people know to come and be part of that?
These four guys had an incredible agent, and you've got to realize the wealth that these people had. They had a whole floor of an office building in New York, and the whole floor of an office building here on the west side. And he was their agent and manager, and he could get anything they wanted.
Yeah.
You know, they had limitless funds. They were earning such extraordinary money, and whatever they wanted, they got. Yeah, as simple as that. And but what the real story would be a marvelous movie is the four guys coming into this other world of motion picture making and how it conflicted and changed everyone on the inside, and all the questions you're asking are the real questions.
Were they actually performing at the end for that sequence, for the concert, or were they just acting like they were performing?
Well, no, they had to put on a full-blast performance.
So they did a full show for that audience?
They did a full show. It just went went on. All we were doing is photographing the performance, but it was
Right.
a complete out-and-out performance. And no stopping. There might be a rest pause and that kind of thing. So they put a real show on. And obviously there are no rehearsals because you don't need it. I couldn't direct them on that. This was their territory.
What did you think about that? Were you
Yeah,
impressed by
stunned
their mastery of the stage? You were stunned?
Yes.
What were the greatest challenges that you met with during the production aside from time?
I think they were technical mostly, trying to get the script to do things that we couldn't do because of limitations of expenses, and the great disappointment that you couldn't convince anybody to use the blue screen, which would have made everything so much simpler. When you ask actors like that to perform on boxes which are all blacked out, so you're only photographing the actors, but you're going to superimpose them onto the real thing. It's not the same. It inhibits them.
Yeah.
They don't grasp what they have to do, and they're walking up steps. So they're more concentrated on walking up steps and thinking of the acting. And that I found very disappointing.
So that must have been a financial consideration? Is that
I think they were
to?
frightened of it because they didn't understand it.
Oh,
in television.
Okay.
If they were film people, they would understand it immediately.
You mentioned earlier that there may have been some, editing stuff that was done without you. Were you a part of the editing process much at all?
I'm sure I was, and I would have seen some of it, but I certainly didn't go into the detail as you would normally do with a feature film.
There are two versions of the film. There's the U.S. version that aired on television, and several years ago, as part of a DVD box set, KISS released an extended version that they refer to as the European version of that. Did you have anything to do with the longer version, or did they approach you about working with them through making this release?
No, they certainly didn't. In television, as a whole, the producer of television usually writes the script, has, a cast of characters that he knows very well that he's hired.
Right.
And then that's his baby, and he's suddenly handing his baby over to a complete stranger, a director who's just hired for a week or two, and takes his baby and does things with it, and then hands him back. They don't even want to see you afterwards. They just want the bits of film, and then they mostly put it together and get it out. And if in the Directors Guild you were forced to go and do, see the editing and make your editor's cut, but I just assumed didn't wish to go because they're going to change it any way they want anyway in the end because it's their property, and I could understand that way.
Did you watch it when it aired?
I've never seen the picture. You really want to know because what happens is you're out of town and you're filming abroad, and you never get to see those films. Today it's easy. You can buy a disc and that kind of thing. I have seen it. Somebody showed it to me at some point, but many of the pictures I made I haven't seen.
The film has become a classic for the fans of the band, of course, but also just for people who love science fiction type cinema as well.
Yeah, because I remember some other magazine, some 2 or 3 years ago, grilling me on this picture, and I couldn't believe that at this stage it would still hold up.
Here, KISS is about to release another album. They're still going as a band, and in fact, their last album was their biggest moneymaker yet. Did you have any idea, looking at this group of guys that are just swimming in money, they're making crazy requests for omelets for your meeting and things like that? Did you ever think that they would last this long?
Absolutely not. I was just stunned. I went with Gene Simmons. He invited me to a party afterwards. He had a girlfriend. It was actually a pre-wedding party or wedding party. I can't remember, but what lengths they went to impress the girl. They had skywriters writing. They had a tank come down Sunset Boulevard to the restaurant wherever we were that he rented. for the whole occasion. And I mean, it was unbelievable.
When would that have been?
Well, that was after the film was over.
Okay, so right after you guys were done. Wow, okay.
And I think, I know
Cher. Cher, that's who he was dating for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. It was Cher who was there, who's a very bright girl, and it was all in her honor. I mean, it's just spectacular. He should really be a director.
I'm sure he would love to hear that.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's actually gone on to write some very successful books on personal finance management.
I always was struck by him. He was very bright, and you wouldn't think would be anywhere, would be in the entertainment business in some way. You think of him with the knowledge of a school teacher, educator, and so on, and then he's the one who presumably had the inspiration of having fire coming out of his mouth and the long tongue and so on.
Right. That's a neat story about him.
I'm sure it was a wedding party or a pre-wedding party. I'm sure he had married her and I was invited. They hired a plane to write her name up in the sky, and she liked Dr. Pepper, so he had a tank come in down Sunset Boulevard, and the men got out and they brought Dr. Pepper out of the tank.
A tank like a military tank?
Yeah. I mean, it's just incredible. And it's so bizarre, you couldn't believe it.
Is that the last that you've seen, Gene?
More or less, I'm pretty sure it was. At that particular period was a very, very strange world. It was sort of Beatle period or post-Beatle period. But to come out with a theater that they invented, we didn't invent it, they invented it. It was quite extraordinary. And to get that crowd, and it's extraordinary that a film like this, that somebody would ask me anything about it. Around that time, films were not attainable. It was very hard if somebody wanted to look at your work. You'd have to go to the studio, ask them to loan you a 35mm copy. You'd have to ship it to the person who needs to see it, and they had to have a projector and all of that. It was very, very difficult to see films.
Yeah, it's interesting that cinema was something that you never thought about having a chance to experience again. For many, many years, you just thought you would get that chance to see it when it was in your local theater, and you probably never thought about ever revisiting it again.
That was the great golden days, as they say, of Hollywood, where the studios had 100 directors and 100 actors under contract and writers under contract.
Yeah.
And they developed people, and they developed the star system. And I don't know anybody, very, very few people in today's thing who match the quality of those great actors. Because today there's very little literature in film. It's all special effects. And it's a shame because, the films that were made and the work they did was just fantastic. But that was when they had a studio system before it was broken up by the government. And now you have, instead of all the money going back into the studios to develop cameras, it's going to one particular star who makes so much money he doesn't put it back into the art.
Right.
Which is a great shame. But anyway, it was a wonderful experience.
The second interview I did for the magazine piece was with the star of the film. Outside of Kiss, if you think of Phantom of the Park, you think of Gene, Paul, Ace, and Peter, and then there's Anthony Zerbe, who played Abner Devereaux, the madman behind the scenes. Every time I head into a project, whether for print or for film, there's always a dream list, and I usually assume I'm not going to get the bigger people that were involved with it. That certainly was the case with Anthony Zerbe and Phantom of the Park. He's a guy that had never had a kind word to say about the movie, not much of anything to say at all, really. And I was shocked when he reached back out to me saying he was willing to have a conversation, but there was a caveat that he didn't think he'd have a whole lot to offer. You're going to hear that is true in this brief interview with Anthony. It was nice to hear from him and to be able to get his voice into the piece, but he pretty much just seemed flummoxed by the whole thing and rather confused about what it was even about. It's still a fun chat, and I hope you enjoy hearing from Anthony here.
You're calling about the KISS thing, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, I have nothing to say. I didn't know them. I didn't work with them. I didn't meet them, barely just to shake hands. And they were always in their, furtively in their costumes.
Okay. Well, the piece is actually on the film itself, so it isn't necessarily about your relationship with KISS. It's also to tell the story of the film. The picture got a lot of renewed interest when that new KISS DVD set came out several years ago. That included that extended cut, and so there's a whole new generation of fans that didn't know any of the stories behind its making, and so that's really what I was wanting to chat with you about it. So it doesn't necessarily have to pertain directly to KISS as much as it does sharing.
I have no idea what that film is about. Have you seen it?
Yes, sir, I have.
Well, do you have any idea what it's about?
Maybe you can tell me how you interpreted what you were doing with. Were you trying to take over the world? Were you?
Well, it could be. I don't know. Fling people off rides.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea. I don't know what that fucking thing was about. I saw it. I couldn't make heads or tail of it. I wasn't too sure. I enjoyed playing the scientist, but as for the outcome, what it was trying to say or what it was, I have no idea. I don't know. It didn't seem logical or to make any sense to me. I didn't work on it that long. I just went in and did my thing and left and got paid,
Did you shoot that at Six Flags? Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so you were actually inside the park shooting the film for all of your segments, or was any of that done in a soundstage?
It was most of it was done inside the park, and then some of it was done on the soundstage.
Okay.
Wherever it was shot.
Is there sort of an underground, sort of activity center wherever your main lab, I guess you'd call it, was? They sold it in the film as though it was sort of under the park. Where was that in actuality there?
On a set.
Okay, that part was on the set. Okay.
Yeah.
So you walking into this, how are you responding to things when they bring out, for example, these guys who were supposed to be animatronic singers and all of that?
That was the KISS people. Yeah.
Well, there was that, but there was also like a barbershop quartet.
I have no recollection of that, and I have no idea what that was.
Okay.
I read it, and I said, okay, I can do this. It's interesting enough to do. And I did it, and then I saw it put together, and I just watched about 15 minutes of it and said, this makes no sense at all.
So you actually never really even spent much time with KISS at all on set, then, you say?
At all. I don't know them. I wouldn't recognize them except in their outfits, and I had nothing, I don't know their music. I don't know what they do. I think the one guy had a long tongue or something, and I just don't. I have no idea what they're about, what they do. Gene Simmons, right?
Right. That's the guy with the tongue.
Okay,
yep.
Okay, that's the only name I know. And I don't know what that is. Well, that's the way they wanted it. They were real, like I say, furtive in their life, so that's okay. That's what they want to do. That's fine.
Were you shooting after hours in the park, or was it off-season? Or how did you
No,
have the
as I recall, there were a lot of people around.
Where was the stage set up in relation to the park?
Whatever the studio was that made it, it was back in a studio, like Paramount or wherever.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't even recall what studio it was.
Okay.
It was a long time ago, man.
It's a long shot, but I really wanted to give you, have a chance to let you share whatever memories you might have of it, and
sure.
So. All right.
Okay.
Well, thanks.
Maybe I'm good for a sentence.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Okay. Good luck.
As you heard in the Gordon Hessler conversation, full credit is given to producer Terry Morse Jr., who was a television veteran and who came into this to really run the show. I love how transparent Terry is in this discussion. He was excited to talk about the movie, and it's something he does look back on fondly, although he doesn't shy away from stories about challenges during the shoot, most notably with Peter and his disappearing act, and he sheds some light on some of the more technical aspects of how they made Phantom of the Park happen. Here's Terry Morse Jr.
So how did you get involved with the project here?
Well, I was working for Hanna-Barbera at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I'd done The Gathering and a couple other movies with them. and they just kind of assigned me to this picture. And it was a real experience. Hanna-Barbera, was the one that made it.
Right.
And we did all the post-production there at the Hanna-Barbera facilities.
Okay. Were they approached? Do you know anything about the origin of the project? If KISS approached them, or if they approached KISS about doing this?
I don't know who. Deke Hayward, who's no longer alive, would know that, but everybody else is gone. Joe and Bill, both Hanna-Barbera, Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera are gone. So somehow I would imagine that Joe Barbera had a lot to do with it. He was the real instigator and the guy that was always looking for things. And somehow they got in touch with the KISS people, and NBC, okayed the script, gave us the go-ahead for a television movie.
What do you remember about the script? Now, I heard that the writers were pretty young and kind of green.
They were, and we had to. Maybe Gordon could have told you some things about them, but it was kind of a kid's script, kind of silly in spots. But we got through it, and it worked fine. The KISS people were great.
Had you worked with Gordon prior to this picture, or how did he end up being brought on as the director?
He was brought in by Deke Hayward, who was head of production for Hanna-Barbera at that time. And he had worked with Deke on low-budget movies in Europe. Okay. And is he living here now?
He is, yeah. Yeah, he's in Los Angeles. I talked to him a couple days ago.
Yeah, how was he?
His memory's a little fuzzy on a few things, but it's amazing what he does remember. And so he was able to really tell the tale. I also talked to Anthony Zerbe about the picture, and he doesn't have much to say about it. It
was a come down for him, I think, for doing a TV movie, and he'd been doing features at that time, and but he did a good job in the picture.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, were you familiar with KISS stepping into this project?
Just barely. I'm not into that group. I'm not a KISS follower. I can tell you a couple things. We shot out at Magic Mountain, the concert. Mm-hmm. And before we shot it, there were a couple of radio stations, and I don't know what they are now, but we asked them to let the fans know that we're doing a KISS concert, and they could come out there and get in free. And that went on for a couple of weeks. So the day we did it, they gave them the time and the date and all of that. We thought we'd get about 10,000 people out there, but we got more like 20.
Wow.
I mean, it was just a huge group because it was free. And they came out early. The early ones get the front seats up close. And but it was, and they did a complete concert. I think there was something like 16 or 17 songs that they went through, and for about 3 hours, and we had 4 cameras going. Mm-hmm. And I had people on each one where they would go to different spots and do, in other words, concentrate on Gene Simmons and then concentrate on Stanley and Peter Criss and Ace, all of them. And we got pretty good coverage on the concert. It was a lot of fun. And by the way, they were terrific guys to work with, all of them. The power people behind them, I don't know if Ace and Peter are still with them, are they?
They are not at this point, no.
Yeah, but I was going to say the main 2 people are Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, of course. Mm-hmm. And if we wanted to do anything, we would go to either mostly Gene. We would say, "Look, we want to do this and do that," and he would speak for the group.
Yeah.
And another interesting thing is, in all television and movies, as far as that goes, we have makeup people and hairdressing people, and which made up the balance of the cast. But the KISS guys, they do their own makeup. They come in and they just like they were doing a concert. But I'm talking about every day, shooting scenes, interior scenes where there's dialogue, things like that. They would come in and get themselves made up and be ready to go.
What do you remember about first meeting with them when you sat down with them? Was it at the first production meeting or?
Well, the first meeting was with just Gordon Hessler and myself, and the production manager, Art Levinson, met with Gene, and he was going with Cher at that time, you remember?
Yes.
And we met at some nice restaurant in Beverly Hills, and, he spoke for the group.
Yeah.
And I really didn't meet the guys until we started to shoot. There were no rehearsals. they were on tight schedules at that time. They were pretty busy.
Yeah.
So they just came out. They all had the scripts, and we all talked about it a couple of days before. And Gordon, I think, did he say he got a little rehearsal time out of them? Did he mention that?
He didn't say anything about rehearsal time. No.
Yeah, I don't think there was very little, if any, at all.
He said it was a pretty breakneck pace for the shoot itself. Do you remember how long it was? His memory was something
it was,
like
4 weeks, 24 days. 20 days. In those days, that's what TV movies were: 4 5-day weeks.
Okay.
And it was breakneck, shooting out at Magic Mountain and then going to these other locations, and it was a scramble time.
What did Gene have to say? Like, what was he looking for out of the project when you met with him to talk about it?
Publicity, to get their name out there. And I think, and Gene could tell you this, I think they had a couple new songs that they were going to do and hope to get those kicked off on the movie. But he's very publicity conscious, Gene is.
Yeah. Yes.
And it was a real nice experience because they really were into it, and this was their first and I guess only movie they ever were in.
Yep.
I guess you said they had some kind of a clip or something. They did something quickly on TV.
They were in a film called Detroit Rock City that Gene was a producer on probably about 10 years ago or so, and it just amounted to a brief concert scene at the end of the film, really. But that was really about it as a band. So this movie definitely is their one full-on film, starring the band, which is pretty amazing considering how conscious Gene is of marketing. The band is everywhere. The products are omnipresent, and so.
And they were really hot then.
Yeah.
Their toys and stuff that they would, T-shirts and all the stuff they had. I mean, my God, it was really an operation. I don't know if many of those people that managed them are still alive. Well,
now they've sort of whittled it down to just Kiss Music Company. Their last album opened at number 1, and they have another one coming out soon, and that's what the magazine is a tie-in for, is the release of that album. And then they're actually, the band, amazingly, these guys are in their 60s, and they sound better now than they ever have before. They
were having trouble with Peter Criss at that time, the drummer.
Yeah. What kind of trouble?
Well, he just was not. First of all, he insisted on doing that one song, where he had the solo that night out there.
Yep.
And I don't know if they all wanted to do that. I mean, it wasn't their kind of music.
Right.
And I think he quit the group right after that. Now, whether he went back for a while or not, I really didn't follow in that. But I know at the end of the concert, he just got up and left. And we had to put in a lookalike back there just to fake things. He was giving the other 3 guys a bad time.
Was Peter's voice dubbed? There's a guy who's credited with having done his voice. Was that throughout the entire film?
No, there's just a couple of scenes where he couldn't. It may be that we couldn't get a hold of him or he didn't want to do it, but we did some revoicing him. We tried to get somebody that sounds a lot like him. The same thing with Ace, although we went back to New York and dubbed Ace back there and did his voice because he has a real high voice.
Yeah.
We couldn't get a voice alike for him. But yes, we did not all of it. There's some stuff that some of the interior scenes that it's really his voice, and I can't tell you where because when you shoot movies, they sometimes the soundtrack is not good no matter what you do.
Yeah.
You have offstage noise that you have to go in and revoice these people.
Were Ace and Peter a problem on set? Because I know at the time they were using substance abuse and things like that they were dealing with.
They might have been, but for me, I was standing behind the camera with the director and the production manager, overseeing everything, and they never really were a problem. I got to say that for them. They just all jumped in and they wanted to make as good a movie as they could. It just, as you say, these substance things might have gotten in a couple days here or there, but I was really unaware of it. I wasn't looking for it.
Sure, sure. Is it true that they had to have their lines fed to them throughout the shoot, or did they know the script? I mean, granted, none of them had a lot of dialogue anyway, but we
didn't have to feed them. What we would do, naturally, you'd get up to a point, and then when we go into close-ups, you do retakes, you do it over, and you pick you print up 3 different takes of the same thing, and you're going to get it.
Sure.
You know, they were okay.
Okay.
They're not professional actors. You know, we would give them the call sheets at night and say, this is your lines for tomorrow. And they'd take this paper off, and I don't know, they'd be there the next morning, whether they looked at the script that night or I don't know. Bill Coyne, that's the guy's name. I don't know if he's still alive. He's the one that was really organizing them, and he took care of, you know, the traveling and moving all this equipment around at different stages and pre-lighting it and all that. He was on top of everything, and we would go to him with a lot of problems, and he would get things solved.
Okay. What do you remember about working with Anthony Zerbe? How did you end up bringing him on board if he was used to, you know, doing theatrical and things like that?
His work speaks for himself. He's the kind of character that we were looking for this part. And I don't know, you know, between Joe Barbera and Deke and Gordon Hessler, you know, we've looked for a lot of people, and he was the one we picked out and got the part.
Talking to Gordon, he mentioned in his memory the role of Melissa in the film, who was played by Deborah Ryan. He remembers that there was someone else cast for that originally that there was a problem with or something. Is that true?
No, he's mixed up. The guy was the guy that we had to read. In fact, we shot for a couple of days with him. Coincidentally, he was Joseph Cotton's son. The actor's son came in, and we shot for a couple of days. And when Joe Barbera, he saw all the pictures ahead of time. He never met this other cast, and he wanted a blonde guy. So I forgot his name. The blonde guy in the picture.
Yeah.
But he went on, and I guess he became a soap star after that.
All right.
But we did shoot with the other guy for a couple of days, and then had to change that.
Okay.
Deborah stayed on all the way through.
Good. I'm glad we got that cleared up. And how did you arrive at the location of Six Flags? Were they just easy to work with and easy access?
Yeah, Taft Broadcasting at that time had a place back in Richmond, Virginia that they wanted us to go to, but hauling everybody back there and shooting the whole picture back there and getting the crew back there.
Yeah.
Going to an area that doesn't have a lot of movie people, we convinced them that let's just shoot it here. I forgot what we paid for the place, but we got it at a pretty good deal, and we were there for a few days, shooting both days and nights. And on the studio, we used the old Culver City lot that they shot Gone with the Wind on. It used to be part of MGM many, many years ago. That's, in the scene where Gene walks through the wall.
Yeah.
That was all shot on the back lot there at the Culver lot.
Okay.
But I'll tell you one thing, Gordon was going crazy because the original cameraman, he was going slow and lighting stuff, and Gordon came to me and he said, Terry, I can't get my work done with this guy. So we did have to change cameraman about a week or week and a half into the picture. I had to bring in Bob Caramico, who's a television, an episodic television cameraman that knows how to go fast.
Yeah.
And he came in and he got it going. The other guy was more documentary and creative and that crap, but we did change cameramen.
Where was the stage actually set up where the band did their concert? Was it near Six Flags, or was that?
It was right there at Six Flags. And yeah, I think you can see. There are shots where you can see that big structure where you have the roller coaster. In fact, we shot stuff in there. But that was all shot right there. That was shot because they had the space out there. We set up the stage completely from just bare ground. And that's where Bill O'Coin come in. He brought the stage in, he brought the lights, the overhead lights, and set up the sound and did it all.
So were you shooting this in the off-season for the park, or is there an off-season for the park?
Well, there's a couple of days that they're closed at that time where they do maintenance. And then we shot nights in there. So we were, and also we were shooting in there a day or two where there were other people in the background, but we took in like 50 to 100 extras and used them in our immediate scenes.
All right.
That's the way that was handled because we couldn't close down the park, but we did work around them and they were terrific. One
thing that I did want to make a point to ask about that Gordon didn't remember at all being, happening was Ace's stuntman. in his fight scenes, in at least one of the fight scenes, the one with the sort of like little, I don't know what you call them, like the monkey creatures that are there. His stuntman is clearly African American, and I was just curious, and fans have been curious for years, if that was just like a last minute, oh, we need a guy, or was it just something that no one even paid attention to? Did you ever notice that this was the case? Because it's very obvious on screen.
None of us ever noticed that. People look at this very carefully, don't they? I don't even remember this case, that we had a black guy doubling Ace.
All right.
You got me there.
So during the production, you mentioned that you talked to Gene in pre-production, and throughout he would sort of answer for the band. Did you have much of a chance to talk to the rest of the guys like Ace, Peter, and Paul during the production?
Well, just regular, movie making. Talk to them. They give them their call, be there on time. They had to allow for their makeup to be on the set, ready to go at 9:00, and. I don't remember any incidents with them. They were all just. This was a new thing for them. Instead of doing concerts, they were working with the behind the camera there, and they were just terrific.
Were they excited? Could you tell that they were?
Yes, they were looking forward to this. Otherwise, it was just a normal TV shoot where you had to do 6 or 7 pages a day to get all the work done. Jim Halsey built that set. The ends where Zerbe worked, and that was shot at the MGM lot. He's still around if you ever want to track him down and ask him questions about making this set. It was quite a big set. Remember, we had the 4-man choir there.
Yeah.
I don't know if that worked too well, but we had a lot of fun, doing that.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious throughout that they're people animatronics.
All of a sudden, these heads are alive.
Yeah. A couple more questions, if I may.
Sure. Go ahead.
You guys had chose to go the optical route with the special effects, as opposed to one of the things that Gordon was talking about is that he was trying to push for using green, or at that time blue screen, and instead opticals were used. Was that a financial consideration? Where Gene would be, where the band is floating around in the air.
Oh, when they're floating around in the on the rides. Gordon
wishes could have been handled a little better. One of the things he just says about it is, the one thing, if there's anything, it's that we can make those special effects play a little better.
Well, I tell you what, in television movies, it's a cost factor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what that was. It would have been probably, I'm thinking way back, probably would have been a lot more money to go, up to, what's his name's company, and George Lucas's company or somebody like that. So, we had to put those bars in there. Those bars were never there. Of course, they were optically laid in, when they're in prison.
Oh, yeah.
Underneath. Yeah, that all had to be optically laid in.
Huh.
There, and I thought they did a fair job on that for television.
Yeah.
See what it looks like on a big screen.
The music in the film is interesting, and during the fight scenes, there's this kind of cartoony music that sounds like it might just be right out of the Hanna-Barbera.
Probably was. They have their own music department there, and forgot the guy's name, but he does all of their cartoons and also whatever live stuff they do. Like the movie The Gathering with Ed Asner. Mm-hmm. They're in charge of all of that, so that's kind of out of our hands. It was Joe Barbera's baby.
How did NBC treat the film once you guys were finished with it? Was it a big film for them?
Yeah, I think they were very happy with it, and I think they had, if I remember, it had pretty good numbers. Yeah, and of course, when you make it, and they can run it twice, and they probably did.
Yeah,
but.
Sure.
No, I think NBC was happy, and they were very cooperative. And at that time, they were watching everything in television. It's not like it is today.
And Hanna-Barbera was happy with the product as well.
Oh yeah, I think so. Although I'm sorry they never went ahead and did other stuff. But I guess breaking up and problems with Ace and Criss, that they just couldn't go into too much other stuff.
Did you have a hand at all in the theatrical cut of?
No, I was gone then, going on to other movies.
Yeah.
And a different editor came in, Lou Lombardo. I don't think he took credit. I think Peter Berger retained the credit because he cut. But Lou came in. Lou, I think, was married to Barbera's daughter. Not sure.
Okay.
But they brought him in. He's a fine editor. He's gone now. But he added some scenes, if you'll remember or you think about it, that weren't in the original, and took out a couple and changed the music around and made it, better for theaters, I guess.
And that just played overseas, right?
I don't know if it ever was released here or not.
So you weren't ever contacted or anything to be a part of the release of that film that came out a couple of years ago as part of that box set, I'm assuming.
No, they didn't need me. My job was putting it together, hiring the crew and feeding them and, getting it done on budget, and then overseeing the editing and getting it dubbed and all of that stuff. That was my job.
Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park landed on NBC television just one day after John Carpenter's Halloween hit theaters. How amazing is that to consider all that was going on at this moment? It was an accidental cultural intersection that would resonate deeply with me. Halloween has been such a part of my story. I love that film and the films that followed, and got the opportunity to be part of that universe for a few years when I was with Trancas. So it's interesting that just one day after audiences first got an eye on Halloween, Phantom of the Park was hitting their television screens at home. It landed and did well in the ratings. It did end up seeing a video release through Good Times on VHS, but it's kind of a weird cut where it's cropped at the top a little bit. It's not ideal by any means, but there are some solid versions of it out there. I recently saw on YouTube where there's a fan who has done a restoration on the movie, presenting it in its television form in an HD-sourced version that looks to be upscaled probably, I'm going to guess. There is a trailer to that that's out there if you take a look for it. The only official DVD release of Phantom was through Kissology Volume 2, where the band included the international cut of the movie, along with a reproduction of the ticket that fans were given when they showed up at radio stations to be part of the concert sequences. That was the free concert that was promoted over and over on all the local radio stations prior to shooting, where they were just saying, come see Kiss for free, bring as many people as you want. And the transfer on that, Kiss in Attack of the Phantoms, which is what that international cut is titled, looks real good. It is a different presentation of the movie, though. The music is different throughout. It pulls a lot more tracks from the solo albums and forgoes a lot of the Hanna-Barbera stock music that was in the broadcast version. But it's worth seeing. I mean, it's absolutely worth buying that set just for the presentation of Phantom in there. The best it's ever looked on any home video release that's legit, at least. And to my white whale comment, I have long yearned to get this thing proper release. I tried with Gene's help to try and track down elements and get the rights straightened out. It wasn't something the band could even do, as you find in that international cut being presented in Kissology, when the TV version should have been there and available. But the licensing world around Hanna-Barbera is pretty muddy. The company has changed hands a couple times over the years, and I can't find anyone to help where it currently resides, so it remains elusive. I've long dreamt of unearthing the 4-camera pro-shot concerts. Getting that concert footage, just imagine how exciting that would be for fans to check out. It's so rare to find pro-shot concerts of them, even though they really did us all a favor with these Kissology sets and presenting bootlegs and dressing them up. It would be absolutely amazing to have pro-shot concert stuff from Phantom of the Park presented in full with the band's live audio from it. And I hope that one day that can be a thing. This was in the midst of me teaming with Gene and editor Chris Alexander on what we had planned to be a new magazine at that time. Gene was interested in helming a lifestyle magazine that was akin to Maxim, if you remember Maxim magazine. But Gene wanted to do this thing called Trash, and it was to celebrate all of the fringe cinema that he loved, the weird music that he was involved with at this time, and to really present the world through the eyes of Gene Simmons. And while the magazine got down to cover design for our first issue, it never really got anywhere beyond that. Because if I remember correctly, Gene was so busy that it just fell by the wayside and has never been mentioned since. So Trash almost happened, would have been one hell of a fun project to be part of, but it just wasn't to be. I ended up working on a poster magazine through Phantasm Media for KISS, a little further down the road from all of this. And I've seen the guys a few times in the interim as well. I took my son to meet them when they played in Iowa a few years ago, and it was torrential rainstorm that night. We had to hide under a trailer out in the infield of this racetrack in Des Moines, Iowa, waiting for the rain to clear before the guys could emerge from their trailer. But then we got some time to hang out with them, which was cool. I also went and saw them, I think it was in Madison, Wisconsin, with Chris and Brian, who ran Phantasm Media. And then my friend Shane and I saw KISS on their farewell tour in Moline, Illinois, which was a thrill and a sad moment, because the band has now hung up their live boots, but who knows what's going to happen next for them. Whatever it is, though, I'm going to be there, and I hope you will be too. This band has such an incredible story, and I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into Phantom of the Park. There's voices in here that you've never had the chance to hear before. There's stories that set the record straight on a lot of production elements, and it really fleshes out the tale behind this incredible time in this zeitgeist moment for a band that at the moment was at their zenith, and they delivered one of the most unforgettable, fun, sci-fi horror romps ever to hit broadcast television. The interview with Gordon Hessler is also going to be included in author John Harrison's upcoming book all about the production of Phantom of the Park, which is going to be, you think this is expansive. Boy, you have no idea. This book is amazing, and I can't wait for it to hit shelves. I'll be posting links when the pre-orders are open for that, but it's due to come out this spring. Again, from John Harrison. More on that in the future. The voicemail topic for this episode was, what movies do you think are long overdue for deluxe, Blu-ray, or 4K release? Let's listen to this first voicemail from Justin Powell, Pizzowl, over on YouTube.
Hey, Justin, this is your old buddy Pizzowl. I hope you're doing well and had a great holiday season. There's only one movie on my wish list for a deluxe edition right now. It's been at the top of my wish list for a long time, and that's Fright Night 2. I still hope the movie gets the kind of treatment that Trick or Treat recently received. I love Fright Night 2. I actually prefer it to the original. I think it has so much character. It's so much fun. And Julie Carmen as Regine. My goodness. Thanks, Justin. Take care.
Fright Night 2 is one of those films that a lot of people have on their list. I think it might have an international release of some sort, at least on DVD. But yeah, long overdue. Long overdue. I can't agree with you on it being better than the original, but I definitely respect that perspective, Justin. The first Fright Night is one of my all-time favorite films, and it has a real special place in my heart for a lot of reasons, one of which was a memorable viewing experience at Insane's Asylum in Ottumwa, Iowa. Mike Saunders of Prescribed Films and Attack of the Killer podcast used to have a little shop there where he sold all kinds of horror collectibles, magazines, makeup kits, and things. And once a month he would have these screenings. And it was a simple matter where he just set up some chairs in the room and we'd sit in front of a TV and watch a movie. And Fright Night, I may have even been the very first one of those. But it was such a great experience, and I love Mike and Jason Bollinger, who's part of AOTKP as well. I love them so dearly that I'll always hold this film close to my heart, if for no other reason than that one. But I agree, Piz, Part 2, man, it merits a wider release, and I can't imagine it's going to be very long now. We are seeing Trick or Treat, like you mentioned, coming out. Martin finally got a good release. So it's only a matter of time before that happens, and I hope it's soon for you, brother. Thank you so much for calling in. This second message is from Brian Godsill, a Patreon member here on the Radio Hour and eternal supporter of Reverend Entertainment. Brian's always putting together solid events, bringing movie screenings into towns where fringe cinema never really would get a foothold any other way. I really applaud what Brian does and appreciate his support of everything I'm involved with. Let's see what Brian has to say about his pick for long overdue movies yet to hit 4K and Blu-ray.
Hey everybody, Brian here. And Justin's asking what movies we would like to see with deluxe editions. Well, I don't know that these movies even have editions that I'm putting on my list. The first one is from 1990. It's called Blood Savage. It's got John Saxon in it. That means it should have some kind of release other than maybe VHS. It's about a farmer that kidnaps people, tortures them, does experiments on them, and sells their organs. I watched it the other day. Kind of got a little bit of an X feel, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, House of a Thousand Corpses feel. Then my second movie is with Grizzly Adams. It's from 1989. It's called Elves. Love this film. I love Dan Haggerty. I mean, who doesn't love Grizzly Adams? And my third film, and this is tip top of my list, Hamburger the Motion Picture from 1986. It's got a good cast, but Dick Butkus, the Chicago Bear, stands out. And Hamburger University, Justin and I had talked about this film before. It's stuck in some kind of litigation with music, but I want this film on something other than the bootleg DVD I have off eBay. Hope you guys had a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holiday. Take care.
Brian, a list after my own heart. Blood Savage I have not seen. I'm going to have to look that one up. But Elves is at the top of my list, too. I love that movie. I watched my bootleg DVD of it this year for the holidays, as I always do. I think the kid in that movie is absolutely hilarious. And how has that managed to miss a greater release? It is a title that everyone's asking for, along with Blood Beach. It's one of these seminal, why isn't this happening titles? And I couldn't agree with you more. But at the top of your list, and near to my heart, Hamburger the Motion Picture. My brother Mitch and I would rent this one over and over again. It was in regular rotation through our VCR, along with movies like I'm Gonna Get You Sucka and the Revenge of the Nerds films. I mean, these are movies that we know front to back. Also in there would be Strange Brew, but this is so hilarious. Years later, I would meet Travis McKenna when I was doing a piece on cheerleader camp, which ended up being run in Delirium magazine, although originally it was written for Fangoria. And the very first thing I wanted to talk to Travis about was Hamburger the Motion Picture, and he was the centerpiece of the legendary 400 Club, that group of big eaters who showed up and chowed down at the restaurant in the movie. Just hilarious stuff. And Travis was not understanding my love for that movie. I talked to him about it. But anyway, great choices, Brian. Always a pleasure to hear from you, man. So good. Next up, we have a call from Steelbook Obsessed himself, Jake Boston. Let's hear what Jake has to say.
So they make deluxe box sets for so many movies these days. I have a plethora of them. I'm lucky enough to help spread the word for many boutique labels. There are certain movies, though, that I feel like don't have a lot of love on physical media at all. And one of the films that I absolutely love, that I would adore to get the box set treatment, would be There Will Be Blood. I think that movie is absolute perfection. We've only gotten it on Blu-ray. There is no 4K of that movie yet, which is asinine to me. We need this on 4K to look as sharp as possible, make that oil look as black as possible. Would love to get some type of amazing new original artwork on the box set. I feel like this would be right up Arrow Video's alley, but that's just me kind of swinging for the fences with this one. I would just love to see some sort of major, huge box set for it. Because again, there are box sets out there for the most obscure movies out there, and they get the craziest treatments when a modern masterpiece like There Will Be Blood is just kind of sitting on Blu-ray. Even when it came out, it had like this unique cardboard packaging, but nothing extravagant, I guess. I would love to see something done for this movie.
You bring up a great point here, Jake. It's a real head scratcher about what movies see deluxe release and what films sort of stay relegated to initial bare bones releases. And I don't think it's bare bones, but to only have There Will Be Blood initially released on a studio package, I think is a real shame. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Paul Thomas Anderson, this is a masterstroke. He and Daniel Day-Lewis did something incredibly special with this movie. And Robert Elswit's cinematography in this merits 4K. If there ever has been a modern film that does, it is There Will Be Blood, and I completely agree. Like I said on Fright Night Part 2, I cannot imagine this is not on the radar of at least a couple distribution companies that are out there, and I hope they come across the finish line soon on them. As always, it's a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for calling in and for listening, Jake. As for my list, in addition to Phantom of the Park, of course, is Cheerleader Camp, which I just mentioned, Excision, John Fasano's film The Jitters, Lady Terminator, which Mondo Macabro did a nice DVD on years ago, but I could contribute so much to it. I actually found the star, Barbara Ann Constable, when I was doing a feature for Fangoria on that film. It's so wild and sane. The Mysterious Monsters, the old crypto documentary hosted by Peter Graves that's only available on a pretty terrible Cheesy Movies is the name of the company. Distribution, surely not legit. Cheesy Movies DVD that came out years ago. And then finally, Pig, starring Nicolas Cage. That is right up there with There Will Be Blood in terms of how does this not have a greater release? Nicolas Cage loves this movie, is very proud of it. And the way it was kicked out onto what is essentially a bare bones, I mean, it has some deleted scenes and then this cooking thing in it. But man, there's so much more to unearth in this very fascinating, unique movie. And it's one of Nick's best performances, I think. Hell, it would just be great to have it without the awful Rotten Tomatoes logo on the cover. What a blemish, right? Ugh. Anyway, Pig. There you go. I could go on all day with titles that belong on this list, but there's a few for you. Thank you, everyone, for calling in. Of course, you can always call the Radio Hour podcast and contribute to these voicemail segments, which I post about on social media, usually about a week or so prior to recording date. The phone number for the voicemail is 951-357-6955. You can call really anytime with any kind of input or feedback, but especially with these voicemail topics, I love to hear from you and appreciate everyone who took the time. So there you have it, the Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park mega episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please stay tuned to the Radio Hour for more exciting guests in this third season. I appreciate you listening and taking a moment to give a rating to the show wherever you're listening to it. Checking out the Patreon and my website, justinbeahm.com, means the world. And I want to encourage everyone in this new year, please be good to yourself and to each other. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Justin Beahm Radio Hour. The Radio Hour is a production of Reverend Entertainment, copyright 2024. All rights reserved.